Hello, today we're going to answer the question, or attempt to answer the question, can we infer whether a gambler knows that a game is rigged by simulating an RL agent? The project is on the HCP dataset gambling task, and the team is the term Bandits. We want to give a brief introduction on the dataset and our research aims. So the participants in the fMRI scanner were shown mystery cards whose hidden value ranged from 1 to 9, and guess whether the value was greater or lower than 5. Participants either received a reward of $1 or lost $0.5 in each trial. They were told that rewards and losses depended on whether they guessed correctly or incorrectly. However, and quite important, rewards and losses were actually fixed, such that participants earned money 75% of the time in one condition or lost money 75% of the time in another condition, regardless of what the participants guessed. This information was withheld from the participants. Participants experienced each condition twice in a within-subject design. Our research aims are, firstly, we aim to replicate a well-documented neural signal of temporal differences reward prediction error. Intuitively, RP represents positive or negative surprise when experiencing a stimulus. Secondly, we hypothesize that participants develop an understanding of the statistics of rewards and losses as trials progress. If this is the case, then the neural signal of RP should systematically vary with the experimental condition.
So what we did with the data was we first extracted the sequence of wins and losses in each trial experienced by each participant. And we also extracted the corresponding fMRI data separated into trials as well. The first step in our approach was to use a simulation model to try and get at what's going inside people's heads as they undergo the procedure. And we did this with a reinforcement learning simulation. And what we did was we fed the sequence of wins and losses into a reinforcement learning agent to estimate the reward prediction error that each participant would represent in their minds, or rather in their brains, as the procedure goes on. And the second step of our approach was to see if the brain indeed encodes this information. And we used a linear regression model to correlate the simulated reward prediction error signal with bold signals in areas that we suspected processed reward in the brain. Specifically, we looked at the striatum, the anterior cingulate, and the orbital frontal cortex. And the final step in our approach, which we didn't have time to do, was to decode information about the procedure using these areas in the brain that signal an RPE. And we would have done that with a linear classifier using the activation in RPE encoding parcels as predictors.
So as Chechen said, we developed a simulation where our reinforcement learning agent essentially plays the exact same game as each participant did. And as it plays a game, we see on the left-hand side, it adjusts its expectation of its reward that it's going to receive. On the right-hand side of this graph, we see the prediction error, which is a level of surprise. The green points correspond to trials where it received a reward, and the red where it received a loss. Black for neutral, nothing. There was no gain or loss. And so you see that there is positive surprise when it unexpectedly sees a reward, and negative surprise when it unexpectedly finds a loss. So then our second step was to see whether our simulated prediction errors during the same sequence of reward and losses could be correlated to regions in the brain that we expected process reward prediction. And so these are the results here of the most significant parcels of the brain that most significantly correlate with our reward, either positive reward predictions or negative reward predictions. So we then we found these correlations between prediction error and brain parcel activity for a single participant, but we wondered then whether there were consistent signals amongst different participants, i.e. the same parcels in the brain, same regions in the brain correlated with prediction error amongst different participants. So here we see a plot where we have plotted the activity in a single region against prediction error, positive prediction error for all participants. We've amalgamated all the participant data into a single data set. So you see here there's no real trend. And actually for each prediction error, the distribution of bold activities that were measured are actually fairly normally distributed and have a very large variance. And furthermore, when we looked into the trends between prediction error and bold activity within a single region for different participants, we see three plots here of three separate participants. There are examples of completely different roughly linear relationships, where on the left we see this positive correlation. On the right-hand side, we see negative correlation, and in the middle, very little correlation at all. And so this showed us that we didn't have one single region in the brain that would be useful to predict prediction error generally as a model for across all participants. But more work must be done to find within each participant what was the area that most correlated with reward prediction, and if it did, before we could then move on to our goal for classification to see whether we could find regions of the brain that generally could predict which reward or loss condition the participants were experiencing. Thank you to our TA, thanks to the whole team members, and thank our TA Gwydion, our mentor Aina. I think we had a lot of fun doing this project. So thanks very much for listening.